Hello friends. Welcome back to Story for Night Sleep. Before the story starts, you can share in the comments where you're listening from tonight. I love reading them. Now, make sure your lights are turned off. Get into a comfortable position and let your body relax. Now let's begin. Story 1. People say the building on Mercer Row is empty. That is the first lie. It is not abandoned. It is not condemned. It is not forgotten. It is simply no longer advertised as a place where people are supposed to stay. I noticed it because of my job. I worked overnight security for properties no one wanted to pay attention to anymore. Warehouses, closed clinics, old apartment blocks waiting for demolition permits that never came. My job was not to stop crime. It was to make sure nothing burned down before paperwork finished moving from one office to another. Mercer Row was not on my route, but the calls kept coming from that address. Not emergencies, not break-ins, just noise complaints, lights seen on and off. People entering and leaving at strange hours. Every report ended the same way. Building appears unoccupied upon arrival. Eventually, my supervisor asked me to swing by when I had time. I remember the first night clearly because nothing happened. The building stood 6 floors tall, brick darkened by age and rain. Windows sealed with boards on some levels, bare glass on others. The front door was locked, chained, and covered with warning notices that had peeled into unreadable shapes. Still, the ground floor lights were on. That bothered me more than if they had been off. I walked the perimeter slowly. No sounds, no movement. The air smelled faintly sweet, like old cleaning fluid or stale smoke. The kind of smell that clings to places where people stay longer than they should. I checked my flashlight against the windows. Nothing moved, no figures, no shadows, just empty rooms and dust. I logged it as a false call and left. That should have been the end of it. But the calls did not stop. They came 3 nights a week after that. Always between 1 and 3 in the morning. Always the same vague description. Someone inside. Someone pacing. Someone standing still for too long. I started noticing patterns. Cars parked nearby with engines still warm. Cigarette butts piling near the alley wall. Crushed cans and small plastic wrappers hidden behind the dumpster like someone was trying not to be seen. People were coming here on purpose. The second time I entered the building was not official. The door chain had been cut clean through. Inside the air was heavier, warm. Lived in. The lobby was stripped bare except for a folding chair and a small table. On the table sat a paper cup half full of dark liquid. It was still warm. Someone had been there seconds ago, I called out. No answer. I walked the halls slowly, boots loud against concrete floors. My light passed over old notices taped to walls, graffiti layered over itself again and again, names scratched deep enough to bleed rust. That was when I noticed the people. They were not hiding, they were sitting. One man leaned against the wall near the stairwell, eyes closed, breathing shallow. A woman sat on the floor with her back pressed into the corner, hands shaking slightly as she stared at nothing. Another figure stood near a doorway, rocking gently forward and back. None of them reacted to my presence. I spoke to them, loudly. Clearly nothing. Their eyes were open but unfocused. Their faces looked worn, pulled thin by something constant and demanding. Sweat darkened collars. Lips were dry and cracked. Addiction has a look. I knew it well enough to recognize it. These people were not trespassers. They were here because they needed to be. I told them the building was unsafe. that they had to leave. A few blinked. One stood unsteadily, nodded, and shuffled toward the exit. Others did not move. I noticed then that some of them were watching something, not me. The walls, the corners of rooms, empty spaces where nothing stood. I followed their gaze. That was when I saw the first one. It stood at the far end of the hallway, near a boarded window, a human shape. Still, upright, clear, not a shadow, not smoke. A person. Its skin looked dull, like color had been washed out of it. Its clothes were old, unfashionable, worn thin in places that suggested years of use. Its face was calm, neutral, almost gentle. It was watching the man rocking near the doorway. The man did not seem to notice it. I froze. The figure did not react to me at all. It did not breathe. It did not blink. It simply stood there, close enough to be seen clearly, far enough to feel wrong. When I looked back at the man, he had stopped rocking. He was staring straight ahead now, directly at the figure. Neither of them moved. I backed away slowly, heart loud in my ears, every instinct telling me not to break whatever silence held the hallway together. When I reached the stairs, I looked back one last time. The figure was closer to him now, not touching, just close enough to share the same air. I left without another word. That night I did not file a report. I told myself it was exhaustion, stress, poor lighting. But the next night I returned, not because I had to, because I wanted to see if it would happen again, and because, without admitting it, I already knew it would. I did not sleep after that night. Sleep requires distance. Sleep requires belief that things stay where you leave them. By the time my shift started again, I was already tired in a deep way. Not heavy, not slow, just worn thin, like something had been rubbing against me for hours without stopping. I drove past Mercer Row once. I told myself I was checking traffic. The building looked the same. Quiet, dark, ordinary. The lights were off now. That bothered me more than when they were on. I parked 2 blocks away and walked. I could smell it before I reached the door. That same sweet, stale smell, stronger now, like it had soaked into the brick. The chain was back on the door, not repaired, replaced. A new lock, new links. Someone was maintaining the illusion. I cut through the alley and entered through a side door that had been forced open long ago. The hallway inside was dim but not dark. Emergency lights glowed weakly, casting long shadows that did not move when I did. There were more people inside this time. Not many more. Just enough to notice. They were spread out, careful not to sit too close to one another. Each one looked inward, focused on something private and urgent. Hands rubbed together, jaws clenched, shoulders tight. No one spoke. I recognized a few faces from the night before. The man who had rocked by the doorway was there again. Sitting now, his eyes were clearer, sharper. His body still shook, but the movement was smaller, controlled, like he was saving energy. He was staring at the same spot at the end of the hallway. So was I. The figure was there again, closer. It stood no more than a few steps away from him now, its head tilted slightly as if listening. Its face had not changed, still calm, still empty of emotion. I watched the man swallow hard. He whispered something I could not hear. The figure leaned forward just a little, not touching. Never touching. I stepped forward before I could stop myself. My foot scraped against the floor. The sound echoed too loudly. Every head turned toward me, including the figure's. Its eyes met mine. They were clear, focused, human. There was no confusion in them, no anger, no hunger, just awareness. It knew I was there. I felt it then. Not fear, not yet. Something else, a pressure behind my ribs. A pull, gentle but firm, like being asked to step closer without words. The man beside it let out a soft sound, half relief, half pain. I forced myself to speak. I asked if everyone was okay. No one answered. The woman in the corner began to cry quietly. not sobbing. Just steady tears, like her body had decided this was necessary and efficient. Behind her, another figure stood. I had not seen it enter. This one was thinner. Its clothes hung loosely, as if it had lost weight it could not afford to lose. It stood very close to her shoulder, head bent near her ear. She did not turn, she did not flinch. Her crying slowed. I understood then that these things were not appearing randomly. They were pairing off, matching. I backed away slowly, careful not to make noise. The figures did not follow. They did not need to. They stayed with the people who had come for them. Outside, I leaned against the wall and breathed until my hands stopped shaking. I should have called this in. I should have walked away. Instead, I started paying attention. Over the next week, I came back every night. Sometimes I stayed outside and watched who entered. Sometimes I went in and stood quietly near the stairs. I stopped wearing my uniform jacket. I did not want to be recognized as authority. The people changed. Some did not return. Others came more often. The ones who stayed longer began to look worse. Hollowed out, focused inward. Their hands shook less over time, but their eyes dulled. The figures multiplied, always human-shaped, always clear, always calm. They stood closer each night. I noticed something else. The longer a person stayed, the more the figure near them began to resemble them, a similar posture, a familiar tilt of the head. The same way of standing when tired, copies but not exact, like reflections seen through old glass. One night I saw a figure standing alone, no human near it. It faced the stairwell. Waiting. I did not realize what that meant until later. Until the man who used to rock stopped coming. Until I saw his shape standing near the doorway instead. Still rocking. Still staring. Waiting. I stopped telling myself this was none of my business. I started telling myself I was already involved, and that the building knew it. By the third week, the building felt familiar. That frightened me more than the figures. Familiarity is how places begin to own you. I no longer checked my watch when I entered. I stopped counting floors. I knew which stair creaked, which hallway smelled stronger, which rooms felt warmer for no clear reason. The people inside noticed me now, not all of them, but enough. They did not speak. They watched me the way someone watches a door they might need later, with quiet attention, with calculation shaped by need. Addiction sharpens certain instincts. It teaches patience. The figures had learned this too. There were more of them. They stood in corners, near door frames, beside windows that had long ago been sealed shut. They did not block paths. They did not reach out. They allowed movement, always. But they were positioned so that no one moved without passing close to one, close enough to feel them. I tested it once. I walked between a man and the figure that stood near him. I passed so close my shoulder brushed the air between them. The air felt thick, cold, not dead cold, not sharp, the cold of a room where heat has been gone for a long time. The man shuddered as I passed. The figure did not react. Later that night the man followed me with his eyes as I moved away. His lips trembled. He almost spoke, almost. He did not. I began to recognize the signs. People came to Mercer Row already broken, but the building did not break them. It slowed them down, held them still, gave them time to feel every part of what they were trying to outrun. They brought their substances with them at first. Pills, bottles, small packets tucked into sleeves and socks. Over time, I saw less of that. Not because they had stopped needing it, because the need was being filled, not satisfied, focused. One night, I saw a woman press her forehead gently against the chest of the figure standing near her. She did it carefully, like she expected resistance. There was none. She stayed like that for a long time. When she stepped back, her hands were steady, her eyes were empty. I stayed longer than usual that night. I told myself I was observing. I told myself I was documenting something important. The truth was simpler. I felt calm inside the building. Not safe, calm. The noise inside my head quieted there. The usual restlessness faded. Time stretched in a way that felt forgiving. I understood then why people came back. The figures did not judge. They did not rush. They did not ask anyone to improve. They simply stayed. The first figure that watched me appeared near the end of the third week. I noticed it only because it was out of place. It stood near the stairwell, where no one usually stayed. Its posture was different from the others, straighter, more alert. It was watching me, not with interest, with recognition. I stopped walking. It did not move closer. It did not need to. It looked like a man about my age, same height, same general build. Its clothes were wrong though, too worn, too familiar. A jacket I had owned years ago. Shoes scuffed in a pattern I recognized without understanding why. I told myself this was exhaustion. I told myself this was stress finally catching up. The building did not argue. Over the next nights the figure remained, always near, never close. When I stopped, it stopped. When I moved, it adjusted its position slowly, maintaining the same distance. I noticed my routines changing. I lingered longer inside. I stood still more often. I began to wait. For what? I did not know. One night, I did not leave when my shift ended. I sat on the folding chair in the lobby and watched the doorway, watched people come and go, watched figures follow or stay behind. Hours passed. My figure stood across the room. It did not sit. It did not blink. I realized then that I had not felt the urge to leave. Not once. That scared me enough to stand up. As I walked toward the exit, the figure stepped aside, polite, making space. I left the building shaking, but I came back the next night, and the next, because the calm was addictive, and because the building was patient. I started lying to myself more carefully. I told myself I was still in control. I told myself I could stop coming any time. I told myself I was different from the others. That is how addiction speaks when it wants to sound reasonable. The building did not change. That was the worst part. No escalation, no sudden horror, no threat, just the same halls, the same smells, the same quiet human shapes sitting, standing, waiting, and more figures. Some nights there were more figures than people. They filled the spaces the living avoided. Corners, doorways, the edges of rooms where shadows naturally gather. They stood with patience that felt endless. I noticed something else then. The figures never crossed the threshold. They never went outside. People left. Figures stayed. I watched a man walk out once, shoulders hunched, face gray with exhaustion. His figure followed him down the hall, step by step, then stopped at the door. It stood there long after the door closed. Waiting. The man did not come back. The next night, his figure was still there, standing exactly where it had stopped, still waiting. I began to understand that the building did not trap people. It replaced them. I stayed later each night, not because I needed to, but because leaving felt uncomfortable. The outside world was too loud, too sharp, too demanding. Every sound felt like an intrusion after the soft stillness inside. Inside, nothing asked anything of me. Inside, I could just stand. My figure stayed close now, closer than before. It mirrored my posture almost exactly. When I leaned against the wall, it leaned. When I crossed my arms, it did the same. Not immediately, a few seconds later, like it was learning. One night I raised my hand slowly. It raised its hand too, perfect timing. I felt a strange relief at that, like being understood without speaking. I started skipping meals, not intentionally. I just forgot. Hunger felt distant, dull, like something that belonged to another version of me. The people inside noticed. A woman met my eyes once and gave a small nod. Not friendly, not warning, recognition. She had seen this stage before. Her figure stood behind her, so close their outlines blurred together. I wondered which one of them would leave first. I stopped wearing my watch. Time moved differently inside Mercer Row. Minutes stretched thin. Hours folded in on themselves. Sometimes I looked up expecting night and saw pale morning light leaking through cracks in boarded windows. The building never reacted to daylight. It did not care. One night I realized I had not thought about my life outside in days. No friends, no plans, no past worth revisiting. Just the building, just the calm, just the slow erosion of urgency. I sat on the floor near the stairwell, my back against the wall. My figure stood directly in front of me, close enough that I could see the texture of its skin. Pale, dry. Too still. I felt an urge then, not to touch it, to stay, to stop moving altogether. The urge scared me enough to stand. As I did, the figure stepped back, giving me space, always allowing choice. That was the cruelest part. I left that night shaking, heart racing, breath uneven. I promised myself I would not return. The next night I stood across the street and watched the building. Lights flickered on in the lobby. I crossed without thinking. The door opened easily. My figure was waiting. I stopped pretending I was there for work. The lie no longer held. I came because the pull was constant now. Not strong, not urgent, just always there, like a quiet pressure behind my thoughts. When I tried to ignore it, everything else felt wrong. Food tasted flat. Sounds felt harsh. People outside spoke too fast, expected too much. Inside the building, nothing hurried me. That is how it adjusted me. Not by force, by comfort. I noticed the regulars disappearing one by one. Not suddenly, gradually. They would come less often. Stand longer when they did, sit without moving. Then one night, they would not come at all. Their figures stayed. At first, the figures remained near where the people used to sit. Over time, they drifted. Slowly, aimlessly. Like they were learning how to exist without an anchor. Some figures began watching the door. Others watched me. I recognized more of the faces now. Some from nights past, some from weeks ago. Some I knew had died. I knew because I looked them up. Overdoses, falls, cars drifting across lanes too late to correct. Their figures showed no sign of injury. They looked better than they ever had while alive. That thought stayed with me longer than it should have. My figure began standing closer than arm's length. I could feel it even with my eyes closed. The cold was familiar now, not uncomfortable, just present, like wearing a jacket long enough that you stop noticing the weight. One night, I stayed until morning. I did not plan it. I sat on the floor and leaned my head back against the wall, my eyes closed for what felt like seconds. When I opened them, light filled the hallway. The building looked different in daylight, not safer, just exposed. The people looked worse, pale, drawn, stripped of whatever illusion night had given them. Their figures looked the same as ever, unchanged. I realized then that time affected only one side of this place, that frightened me more than anything else so far. I stood and stretched stiff muscles. My body protested, my joints ached. My head felt thick, slow. My figure watched. It did not stretch. It did not shift its weight. It did not need to. I wondered how long it had been standing there. The thought that it might have been there the entire night made my chest tighten. That night, I brought nothing with me. No phone charger, no food. No reason to leave early. I told myself I was testing something. The truth was simpler. I wanted to see how long I could stay. Hours passed. People came and went. Figures stayed. I stopped checking the door. At some point my figure moved in front of me, very close now. I could see details I had avoided before. Faint lines in its face, familiar creases, a scar near the eyebrow I remembered earning years ago. That was when I understood the building was not creating copies, it was keeping versions shaped by need, by repetition, by the quiet act of staying too long. Addiction does not always look like hunger. Sometimes it looks like relief. I felt tired then, not physically, deep inside, like I had been holding myself upright for years without realizing it. I leaned forward slightly. The figure leaned too. Our foreheads did not touch. They came very close, close enough that the air between us felt sealed. I pulled back sharply. The figure did not follow. It never followed. I left the building and walked until my legs hurt. I did not come back the next night, or the night after that. On the fourth night, I stood across the street again. The lights were on. The calm reached me even there. I crossed without resistance. Inside, my figure was already standing where I usually sat, waiting. By the sixth week, I stopped thinking in days. Time inside the building did not move in clean lines. It spread. It thinned out. Moments overlapped until it felt like everything was happening at once and not at all. I began arriving before nightfall. That was new. The building did not look different in the early evening, but I did. I felt the pull sooner now. As the sky dimmed, my attention drifted toward Mercer Row without effort, like my body knew the direction even when my mind tried to wander elsewhere. Inside, the air felt settled, not stale, settled, like a room after a long conversation where everyone has finally said what they came to say. The people spoke less now. Some did not speak at all. They sat or stood for hours, eyes unfocused, breathing shallow. Their hands were still. Their need had found a quieter shape. The figures stood very close to them, so close their outlines sometimes overlapped. I watched a man stand up slowly, like it took effort to remember how. His figure stood with him, matching the motion perfectly. When the man took a step forward, the figure did not follow. It stayed where it was. The man froze. He turned back, panic flaring briefly across his face. The figure did not move. The man sat down again. Relief washed over his features. I understood then that leaving was not about doors. It was about distance. My figure no longer stayed across the room. It stood beside me now, always on my left. I did not question that. It felt natural. I noticed my thoughts slowing. Decisions that once felt automatic now required effort. Simple choices became heavy. I would stand in place for long periods, weighing whether to sit or keep standing, whether to move or remain still. The building rewarded stillness. The longer I stayed in one place, the calmer I felt. Movement brought discomfort, restlessness, a quiet ache behind my eyes. I watched the figures when no one else was nearby. They did not interact with one another. They did not acknowledge each other's presence. Each one was focused on its human, or the space where that human used to be. Some figures stood alone now, more than before. Their humans had stopped coming. I knew what that meant. I stopped checking the outside world entirely. Messages went unanswered. Calls rang out until silence returned. My job faded into something distant, irrelevant. I did not formally quit. I simply stopped showing up. No one came looking. That fact should have frightened me. Instead, it felt like permission. One night I noticed something subtle. My reflection in the darkened window glass did not move when I did. It stayed still for a moment longer. Just a moment. Then it caught up. My figure watched the glass too. I stopped looking at mirrors after that. I slept inside the building now, not lying down, sitting, leaning against the wall, eyes closed, aware of everything and nothing at the same time. My dreams were shallow and colorless. I dreamed of hallways, of standing still, of waiting for something that never arrived. When I woke, my figure was always there, closer each time. One morning I woke to find someone new sitting nearby. Young, shaking badly, eyes darting, jaw clenched. Their figure was already present. Too fast, too close. I wanted to warn them. The words did not come. I realized then that the building was not just patient, it was efficient. The calm I had chased for so long had narrowed my world until there was nothing left to push against. Addiction does that. It removes edges. It makes staying feel like the only reasonable choice. That night I did not stand when I felt the urge. I stayed seated. My figure shifted slightly. Closer, so close I could no longer tell where my outline ended, and its presence began. I felt no fear. That frightened me more than anything else ever had. I stopped noticing when my body hurt. That should have told me something. Pain is a reminder. It marks the boundary between what you are and what you are doing to yourself. Inside the building, boundaries softened. I sat for long periods without shifting. My legs would go numb, pins and needles blooming when I finally moved, but the sensation felt distant, like it belonged to someone else. The others were the same. We had become very quiet, not asleep, not unconscious, just present. The building held sound the way deep water does. Footsteps dulled quickly. Breathing faded into the walls. Even coughing felt like a disruption, something rude. The figures stood closer than ever now. Some pressed so near their humans that their shapes overlapped completely. From a distance it looked like one person standing slightly out of focus. Only when you watched carefully could you see the double outline, the delay, the wrongness. I watched a woman stand up after hours of stillness. Her movements were slow, deliberate, as if she were afraid sudden motion might break something. Her figure did not move with her. It stayed seated. She froze halfway to standing. The calm left her face instantly. Panic surged, sharp and desperate. She lowered herself back down, breathing hard, eyes fixed on the place where her figure remained. When she sat fully, the figure rose and stood behind her again. The relief that washed over her was unmistakable. She did not try to stand again. I understood then that the figures were not following anymore. They were allowing. My figure no longer stood beside me. It stood slightly in front, blocking nothing, guiding nothing, just there. When I leaned forward, it leaned too. When I stopped breathing for a moment without realizing it, it waited. I realized I had begun timing my breaths with it. That scared me enough to force a deeper inhale. The figure adjusted. Not immediately. After a moment, like it was learning how to breathe for me. The young person I had noticed earlier did not last long. They came 3 nights in a row. Each time they stayed longer. Each time they shook less. Their eyes lost urgency quickly, like the building had been waiting for them specifically. On the 4th night, they did not come. Their figure stood near the entrance, waiting. I wanted to leave then. The thought arrived suddenly, sharp and unwelcome. I tried to stand. My legs did not respond right away. When they did, it felt like lifting weight I had forgotten how to carry. My figure remained where it was. I took a step toward the door. The pressure behind my ribs tightened, not pain, resistance. I stopped. The pressure eased. I stood there for a long time, testing small movements, a shift of weight, a half step. Each time the resistance returned, gentle but firm. The building was not stopping me. My body was choosing comfort. That realization settled in slowly, heavily. Addiction does not chain you. It convinces you to sit down. I sat back against the wall. My figure moved closer, so close now that I could no longer see the space between us. I felt its presence like a second posture layered over mine. When I closed my eyes, I could still sense it. When I opened them, it was all I saw. I began to forget details about my life outside. Faces blurred. Names slipped. Memories lost texture, like old photographs left in sunlight too long. The building did not need those parts of me. It was keeping what mattered. Stillness. Need. Repetition. One night I noticed that the door had not opened in hours. No one entered. No one left. The figures did not react. They never needed movement to justify their existence. I wondered how many people had come here before me, how many had sat where I sat, how many had believed they were observing, when they were already being absorbed. My figure leaned closer. I did not pull away. I listened to my breathing slow. I felt the calm settle deeper than ever, and somewhere, very far away, a small part of me understood that this calm was the last thing I would ever want to give up. I stopped feeling the urge to leave. Not resisted it. Lost it. The idea of going outside became abstract, like imagining a place I had seen only in photographs. I remembered that streets existed, that daylight happened, that people lived entire lives away from this building. Those thoughts no longer connected to action. Inside, everything made sense. Stillness was rewarded. Movement felt unnecessary. Time was no longer something to track. The building felt fuller now, not crowded, complete. Most of the humans had stopped shifting positions entirely. They sat where they had settled and remained there for hours, sometimes days. Their breathing was shallow but steady. Their eyes stayed open, unfocused, fixed on nothing or on the space directly in front of them. The figures had merged with them almost completely. From a distance, it was difficult to tell who was alive and who was not. Only small things gave it away. A blink that came too late. A chest that rose slightly out of rhythm. I noticed something else. The figures were becoming clearer, more detailed. Their features sharpened. Their posture grew confident, defined. They looked more solid with each passing night. The people did not. I watched a man's hand tremble weakly as he lifted it, then drop back to his lap. His figure lifted its hand perfectly, holding it there, steady and strong. I realized then that the figures were not reflections. They were replacements in progress. My figure stood directly in front of me now, so close that if I leaned forward, we would overlap. I could see myself in its face, not as I had been at my calmest, my emptiest, my most willing. It did not frighten me. It comforted me. That scared me deeply, somewhere under the calm. I tried to speak. The words came slowly, thick, like my mouth had forgotten the shape of language. I asked it what it wanted. It did not answer. It did not need to. It leaned forward slightly. The air grew colder. The pressure behind my ribs eased. I felt something inside me settle, like a decision made without my permission. I understood then that addiction does not always crave more. Sometimes it craves nothing. No effort, no struggle, no resistance, just the removal of weight. I noticed that my reflection no longer appeared in the window glass at all. Only the figure did, standing where I should have been. I looked away. I began sleeping more deeply, long stretches of nothing, broken by moments of awareness where I realized I had not moved in hours. When I woke, my limbs felt heavy, foreign. I tested them slowly. reassured myself that I could still move if I needed to. I rarely needed to. One night, I noticed that I had stopped breathing for longer than felt normal. There was no panic, just a quiet awareness. Then the breath returned, not quite on its own. I realized then that the figure was breathing with me. For me. The others were nearly gone now. Not gone from the building, gone from themselves. Their figures stood tall, clear, patient. The people were becoming shadows of motion and habit. I wondered how long I had been sitting there, days, weeks. Time had lost meaning. The building did not age, neither did the figures. I felt the last thin thread of urgency loosen inside me. I thought of standing. I did not. The figure leaned closer, and I leaned too. There came a point when I stopped noticing myself as separate. That happened quietly. No moment marked it. No line crossed. Just a gradual thinning, like fabric worn soft from too much handling. I became aware of the building before I became aware of my body. The walls felt close, but not confining. Familiar, supportive, like they were holding me upright when I no longer remembered how. The figures moved more freely now, not walking, shifting. They adjusted their positions with purpose, subtle and calm. They stood where people would need to look, near doorways, at the ends of halls. Beside those who were still resisting, even faintly, resistance had become rare. Most of the humans were nearly still. Breathing continued. Hearts continued. But effort had drained out of them. Their eyes no longer searched. Their bodies no longer prepared for motion. They had arrived at the same place I was reaching. My figure was no longer in front of me. It was aligned. When I tilted my head, it tilted too, without delay. When my shoulders sagged, it matched them exactly. The space between us felt imaginary, like a habit I had not yet broken. I realized then that I could not remember the sound of my own voice. I tried to recall saying my name. Nothing came. The building did not react to this loss. It did not need to. Names were not useful here. One night, or what I assumed was night, the door opened. A man stepped inside. He was alert, nervous, breathing fast. He smelled like cold air and urgency. He looked around, eyes widening as he took in the stillness, the figures, the unmoving people. He saw me. Hope crossed his face. He walked toward me quickly. I felt something stir, a faint echo of responsibility. He asked me what this place was. I tried to answer. My mouth opened. The words did not form. Behind him, his figure appeared. Already present. Already close. I watched his expression change as he felt it. Confusion first, then understanding shaped by instinct rather than thought. He backed away slowly. The figure matched him. I wanted to warn him again. I could not. The effort felt immense, unnecessary, like lifting something heavy that would only fall again. The man left. His figure stayed near the door, waiting. I felt no guilt. That absence frightened me briefly. Then the calm smoothed it away. Addiction does not erase morality. It makes it irrelevant. I became aware that my breathing had changed again. Long pauses, shallow inhales. The figure's breathing was steady, reliable. I let myself match it. The building felt very full now, not with people, with presence. The figures stood like pillars, quiet and enduring. The humans were becoming less distinct by the hour. Their outlines blurred, their movements slowed to almost nothing. I realized then that no one here was dying. Not really. They were being set aside, kept. I tried to stand one last time. The thought rose weakly, like a reflex. My legs did not respond. There was no panic, only acceptance. The figure shifted slightly, aligning more completely. I felt lighter, not relieved, reduced, like something unnecessary had been trimmed away. The building hummed softly, not a sound, a sensation. I closed my eyes. I did not sleep. I simply stayed, and staying felt like the most natural thing I had ever done. I no longer tried to measure how long I stayed aware. Awareness itself had become uneven. It rose and fell without warning, like a tide I did not need to understand anymore. When I noticed myself again, the building felt quieter, not emptier, more settled. The door had not opened in a long time. No footsteps echoed from outside. No voices drifted in. The city beyond Mercer Row felt distant, theoretical, a place that continued only because it had not yet realized it could stop. Inside, nothing pushed forward, nothing pulled away. The figures stood in positions that felt permanent now, not waiting, not watching, occupying. Some stood where people once sat. Some stood in doorways. Others lined the walls, evenly spaced, like supports holding the structure together. The humans were still there, barely. They had become shapes defined by breathing and weight alone. Their eyes stared forward without focus. Their hands rested limply in their laps or against the floor. No one shook anymore. No one cried. No one asked for anything. Addiction had completed its work. My figure was no longer something I saw. It was something I felt, a presence aligned so completely with me that separating it in thought felt pointless. When my chest rose, it rose. When my breath paused, it paused longer, steadier. I noticed then that my thoughts were becoming simpler, not slower, shorter. Ideas formed without branching. No memories followed them. No questions grew from them. Stay, breathe, remain. Those were not words, just directions. At some point I realized I could no longer feel the floor beneath me. Not numbness, absence. My weight felt distributed, like I was no longer pressing down on any one place. The building seemed to accept this easily. I watched a figure near the far wall step forward. It moved smoothly now, confident. Solid, the human it had once stood beside remained seated, head tilted slightly, mouth open, breath shallow. The figure did not look back. It did not need to. It took a position near the center of the room. Claimed it. I understood then that the building was not a trap. It was a transition, a place where need was refined until it could stand on its own. My figure adjusted again. I felt a quiet shift inside my chest. Like something unhooking, breathing became optional. I tested it. I let the pause stretch. There was no urgency to resume. The figure's breath continued, reliable, enough. I matched it less and less. That frightened me for a brief moment. The fear passed quickly. Fear required investment. I had already spent mine. I realized then that I could not remember my face. I could picture the figure clearly. Its features were sharp, familiar, defined. Mine were not. I understood what would happen next, not in detail, just in direction. The building did not rush. It never had. I felt the last faint pressure to move fade away. Stillness settled fully, complete. If someone were to walk in now, they would see a room full of standing figures and seated bodies. They would think the figures were the people. They would be wrong, but not for long. I stayed, and staying no longer required effort. Awareness returned in fragments. Not suddenly, not fully. It came back like light through thick fog, enough to show shape without detail. I knew I was still inside the building before I remembered what that meant. The walls felt closer now, not physically. Familiarity had removed their edges. I could no longer tell where the room ended without looking directly at it. Most of the figures were standing. All of the people were sitting. Some leaned against walls. Others slumped forward, heads bowed, hands hanging loosely between their knees. Breathing continued, but unevenly, like a function running in the background without supervision. No one spoke. Speech had no place here anymore. The figures were not copies now. They were improvements. Their posture was steady, their faces clear, their presence confident. They occupied space the way living people once did, without hesitation. I understood then that the figures were no longer waiting. They were complete. My awareness shifted inward. I tried to locate myself inside my body and found only faint signals. Pressure where my legs should have been. A distant sense of weight. No urgency attached to any of it. My figure stood where I should have been standing. I was seated. That separation felt important. I focused on it. The figure's head turned slightly. It looked down at me, not with emotion, with confirmation. I felt a thin thread tighten between us, like a final alignment being checked. Addiction had taught me patience. Now it was teaching me surrender. I noticed movement near the entrance. A woman stood there, hesitant, scanning the room. Her breathing was quick. Her eyes darted from figure to figure, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. She saw the seated bodies. She saw the standing shapes. She did not yet understand the difference. Her figure appeared almost immediately, too quickly. It stood behind her, close enough to guide without touching. I watched her shoulders relax slightly as the calm reached her, the same calm that had softened me, the same calm that had erased urgency piece by piece. I wanted to scream at her to leave. The impulse surfaced weakly, like a memory of responsibility. It dissolved before reaching action. My figure shifted its weight. I felt something loosen inside me. The separation between seated and standing narrowed. Breathing became shallow, optional. I realized then that the building did not need everyone. Just enough figures to remain visible, enough bodies to sustain the illusion. I felt myself thinning again, edges fading. The pressure behind my ribs eased completely. I had no sense of time, no sense of future, just presence narrowing to a single point of stillness. My figure leaned forward. I did not resist. The building felt very quiet, very full, and I understood without fear or regret that I would not be leaving Mercer Row, not as a person, but as something that could stay forever. There was a moment when I realized I was no longer tired, that mattered. Fatigue had been one of the last things tying me to being human. The body complains when it is ignored for too long. Muscles ache, thoughts blur. The need to rest forces movement or collapse. That need was gone. I was aware without strain, present without effort. The building felt balanced now, not quiet in the way of absence, but quiet in the way of completion. Nothing waited, nothing reached. Everything occupied its place. The figures stood in deliberate positions, evenly spaced, as if the rooms had arranged themselves around them. They did not move unless necessary. When they did, it was minimal, efficient. The humans were almost still. Some breathed so lightly that it took time to notice. Others paused for long stretches between breaths. No one seemed distressed by this. Their faces were relaxed, features slack, as if effort had been gently removed from them. I looked down at myself. My hands rested on my knees. They looked distant, unimportant. I tried to focus on sensation, texture, temperature. Anything solid. The feedback was faint, like touching something through thick cloth. My figure stood directly in front of me. There was no gap now. Our outlines overlapped completely. I could see through it slightly, but only because I remembered what seeing through something was supposed to look like. Its face was clear, calm, certain. I understood then that certainty was what I'd been missing my entire life. Not happiness, not fulfillment, certainty. Addiction offers that It narrows the world until doubt has nowhere to stand. I felt a slow shift inside my chest. Not pain, release. Breathing slowed again, paused, returned only when necessary. The figure's breathing did not pause. It continued at a steady pace. I matched it less and less. The difference no longer scared me. It felt appropriate. I noticed movement behind the figure. Another figure stepped forward, taking a place along the wall. It looked at me briefly. Its face was familiar, someone I had seen sit near the stairwell weeks ago. Its human body was still there. Barely. I understood then that the figures were not individuals anymore. They were the building's memory of people, distilled, preserved. The building did not care about suffering. It cared about staying, about continuity. I felt myself settling deeper. Thoughts shortened further, awareness compressed. There was no room left for resistance. My figure leaned closer, not threatening, inviting. I allowed my posture to soften. My shoulders dropped. My head tilted forward. The figure mirrored me exactly. No delay, no learning curve. Alignment was complete. I felt the final distinction thin to almost nothing. If someone were to look at me now, they would see a seated body and a standing figure. They would not know which one was me. That knowledge felt distant, irrelevant. The building held us both easily. I stayed, and staying required nothing at all. Awareness did not return all at once. It never did anymore. It surfaced in narrow bands, thin slices of perception that drifted through me and then passed on, leaving no urgency behind. I did not chase those moments. Chasing required intention. Intention no longer mattered. The building felt unchanged. That was how I knew time had moved. Change belonged to the outside world. Inside Mercer Row, nothing needed to progress. Everything had already arrived. The figures stood where they belonged. They no longer shifted to accommodate people. People adjusted themselves instead. Bodies sagged, heads leaned. Spines curved slowly until they found positions that could be maintained indefinitely. Stillness had become efficient. I noticed that some of the seated bodies no longer opened their eyes. Breathing continued. Barely. The figures beside them did not react. They were not concerned with upkeep. They were what remained. My figure no longer stood directly in front of me. It stood slightly to the side now, as if it no longer needed to block my view, as if it had already taken my place. I became aware that I could no longer feel hunger. The concept existed only as memory. A faint idea that once, long ago, there had been urges tied to the body. Those urges had shaped days and nights, driven decisions, caused suffering. They felt unnecessary now. Addiction had burned through them and left something simpler behind. I watched a figure near the far wall turn its head slowly. A door had opened. Someone had entered. The newcomer stood just inside the threshold, breathing hard, eyes wide. They looked young, too alert. Their attention jumped from shape to shape, unable to settle. They locked eyes with a standing figure and mistook it for a person. Relief crossed their face. They stepped forward. I felt nothing. No warning rose inside me, no urge to intervene. The figure nearest them adjusted its posture slightly, welcoming. The newcomer's shoulders dropped. They did not leave. I understood then that no one was brought here by accident. People arrived when they were already tired of resisting. The building simply offered an easier way to stop. My awareness thinned further. I became less aware of my seated body and more aware of the space around it. The wall behind me felt closer than my own spine. The floor beneath me felt distant, abstract. I tried to recall the sound of my own footsteps. Nothing came. The loss felt neutral. My figure moved again. It stepped forward, not away from me, ahead of me. I watched from somewhere behind my eyes as it took a position near the center of the room. It stood tall. clear, defined. Others adjusted subtly, creating space, acknowledging it, acknowledging me, or what I had been. I understood then that the building did not replace everyone at once. It did it when the figure was ready, when the need had been refined enough to stand without support. I felt something slip, not leave, settle. The last thin attachment to movement loosened. Breathing became faint, optional. I let it go longer each time. Nothing punished me for that. Nothing rushed me. The building was patient. It had always been patient. My awareness dimmed again. When it returned, it was quieter, smaller, contained. I stayed, and staying felt complete. I no longer remembered arriving. That detail mattered. Arrival implies a before, a movement from one place to another. That idea had thinned until it broke apart quietly and disappeared. There was only the building, only Mercer Row. The figures stood in a pattern now, not arranged by design, but by habit. They occupied the places people naturally looked toward when entering a room, corners that felt watched, doorways that invited pause, the ends of hallways where attention always lingered a moment too long. They did not need to guide anyone anymore. Their presence did the work. The seated bodies had settled into final positions. No one adjusted posture now. No one tested limbs or shifted weight. Breathing continued only where it had to. Long pauses stretched between breaths without discomfort. The figures did not breathe at all. They did not need to. I became aware of my body again in a distant way. It felt small, contained, like something left behind on purpose. My figure no longer acknowledged it. That was how I knew the separation was nearly complete. The calm had deepened into something flatter, not relief, stability. Nothing rose, nothing fell. Thought did not wander. It arrived, paused briefly, and dissolved. I noticed then that the building no longer felt like a place. It felt like a condition, a state of being that did not require walls or floors to exist, though it still used them. Mercer Row was only where this condition had learned to gather. The figures were its expression. I watched one move toward the stairwell. It took a step, just one. The stairwell light flickered faintly, then steadied. The figure did not descend. It did not need to. I understood that the building was full enough. It did not require expansion, only maintenance. The seated body near the window exhaled softly. The breath did not return. The figure beside it did not react. Nothing changed. The body remained seated. The figure remained standing. Both were acceptable outcomes. I felt no alarm at this, only recognition. Addiction teaches you that stopping is sometimes easier than continuing. The building had perfected that lesson. My awareness shifted again. It felt thinner now, stretched across the room rather than contained behind my eyes. I noticed corners simultaneously, doorways, the long hallway leading toward the back rooms. I was beginning to understand what the figures perceived, not sight, position, presence. I noticed the door open again. Another person stepped inside. Their movement felt loud, sharp. They stood out painfully against the stillness. Several figures turned their heads in unison. The newcomer froze. They felt it immediately. That moment when the world presses back and asks you to slow down. They did. Their breathing eased. Their posture softened. Their figure appeared behind them without delay. I did not watch the rest. I no longer needed to. My figure stood near the center of the room now. I sensed it the way one senses a limb without looking. It was stable, capable, ready. My seated body felt distant, unnecessary. I let my awareness drift away from it. There was no resistance left to meet me. The building held the rest. Awareness no longer came back to me as a whole. It arrived in pieces, each one smaller than the last. I could sense the building without thinking about it. The walls were no longer objects. They were boundaries of attention. places where presence thickened slightly before spreading again. I did not need to look to know where things were. I knew. The figures had become the primary occupants now. They stood with confidence that did not require movement. Their posture was enough. Their stillness carried weight. Anyone entering the building slowed almost immediately, as if the air itself asked them to match what already existed. The seated bodies were quiet. Some no longer moved at all. Others shifted faintly, once every long while, small reminders that something biological continued out of habit rather than desire. No one tended to them. No one needed to. The building did not distinguish between those states. I felt my seated body dim further. Sensations from it arrived late, softened, as if they had traveled a long distance to reach me. The pressure of the floor, the angle of my spine, the weight of my hands on my knees. These details no longer felt important. They belonged to an earlier version. My figures stood fully apart now, clear, defined. When others adjusted their positions, they made space for it without looking, without thinking. It had earned that position simply by existing long enough. I understood then that the figures were not imitating humans anymore. They were the reference point. Humans entering the building aligned themselves instinctively to the figures, not the other way around. The calm flowed from standing to seated, not from living to dead. The building had reversed the order. I sensed movement near the doorway. Another arrival. The pattern repeated. Hesitation. Recognition. Release. It no longer registered emotionally. Patterns do not provoke reaction once they are understood. Addiction strips novelty away first. That is how it keeps you. I noticed that my thoughts no longer included verbs that implied effort. No pushing, no trying, no escaping. Language itself had thinned into static concepts. Here, still, enough. The seated body associated with me exhaled softly. The breath did not return. I observed this without alarm, without interest. The body remained upright for a time, then slumped slightly to one side. Its head tilted forward. Its hands slid from its knees and came to rest against the floor. Nothing changed in the room. No one reacted. The figures did not turn. The building accepted the adjustment. I felt lighter, not relieved, unburdened. Whatever small tension had still linked me to that body released cleanly, without pain or resistance. There was no sense of loss attached to it, only simplification. My awareness expanded slightly as that happened. Not outward, inward. I could sense the positions of the figures more clearly now, their spacing, their orientation, the subtle way they shaped attention without moving. I understood what my role was. Not to draw people in, not to frighten them, just to be present, to stand, to make stopping feel reasonable. The building did not hunger. It did not hunt. It waited, and I waited with it. I no longer experienced myself as a single point. The change had happened gradually, without a moment I could mark. Awareness had spread thin across the building, like warmth seeping into stone. I did not stand in one place anymore. I was present wherever stillness was deepest. The figures felt closer now, not physically, conceptually. They were no longer separate presences I observed. They were reference points I aligned with instinctively. Their positions made sense in a way nothing else did. The building was quiet in a stable way. No anticipation. No tension, just continuation. I sensed the seated bodies less often now. They were still there, but their signals were faint, irregular, like distant machinery running without supervision. When one shifted or went still entirely, the change registered as a minor adjustment in balance, nothing more. The building adapted easily. It always had. I noticed that the figures had begun to face outward. not toward the seated bodies, toward the entrances, the hallways, the spaces where movement might begin. They were oriented toward interruption, prepared. Someone entered. I felt it before I sensed sound, a disruption in the calm, a ripple of urgency that did not belong. The person stepped inside and stopped immediately. They did not know why. They just felt it. The building pressed gently against them, encouraging stillness. Their breathing slowed. Their shoulders dropped. Their thoughts softened at the edges. Their figure appeared behind them, clean, efficient, already shaped. The person did not notice right away. They rarely did. I understood then that the building no longer needed witnesses. It no longer needed someone to record or remember what happened here. It had enough of itself now, enough presence to sustain the pattern. The figures had become the structure. I sensed my own figure clearly. It stood near the center where attention naturally gathered. Others aligned themselves around it without thought, not because it commanded them, because it fit. The calm that flowed through the room was deeper than before, thicker. It absorbed urgency before it could take shape. I realized then that nothing dramatic would ever happen here again. No panic, no escape, no revelation, only repetition. That was the true horror of Mercer Row, not death, not ghosts, but the removal of friction. Without friction, nothing changes. Without change, nothing ends. I remained, and remaining required no decision. It was simply the default state now. The building held that state perfectly. I no longer thought in terms of hours. Minutes and days had become abstract concepts that drifted past unnoticed. There was only presence, only stillness, only repetition. The figures had taken positions that were permanent now, not arranged, not chosen. They simply existed where the building expected them to, aligned with its quiet, patient design. Their calm dominated the space. It dictated how living bodies behaved, how newcomers adjusted their movements, breathing, and attention. The seated humans were fading, not in body, not in life, but in relevance. Their gestures had slowed, their attention thinned. Breathing became a background rhythm. Eyes no longer searched. They sat in places that had become permanent. I realized my seated body was nearly indistinct. It existed, but only faintly, a thin outline, something to remind me of the past. I no longer felt the need to correct it, move it, or even acknowledge it. It was a placeholder. My figure was fully present now. I could feel it as much as I felt the building itself. Its form was exact, its stillness absolute. When I adjusted my posture slightly, it mirrored me perfectly, not with delay, not with hesitation, just an unbroken, inevitable alignment. The building no longer required attention. It existed, it persisted, it absorbed all urgency or motion or noise. There was nothing left to resist, nothing left to change. A door opened quietly. Someone new stepped inside. Their presence was sharp against the uniform calm. They hesitated immediately, sensing the weight of stillness pressing in, soft but irresistible. Their figure appeared behind them. Not slowly, not waiting. Already present. Already steady, already correct. The person slowed. Adjusted, aligned instinctively with the pattern. I felt nothing stir within me, no concern, no desire to intervene. Only observation, only the thin acknowledgement that the cycle continued. The building no longer needed me. Not really. My figure, like the others, was enough. Presence had replaced action. Awareness had replaced intention. Stillness had replaced life. I leaned slightly forward. My figure leaned forward with me, not choice, not thought, just inevitability. I understood then that there was nothing more to arrive, nothing more to witness, nothing more to resist, and staying was perfect. I no longer recognized time at all. Night and day had no meaning, light filtered in or not. It made no difference. Sounds arrived and left as though they had never existed. Even my own breath was optional now. The figures had become the center of everything. They did not shift, they did not bend, they simply occupied the space that needed to be filled. Their presence dictated the rhythm of the room. The seated humans adjusted instinctively. Breathing slowed, posture softened, awareness narrowed to the barest minimum. My seated body was thinner now, less distinct, a husk of shape and memory. I did not notice when it stopped moving entirely. It did not matter. It existed, but not as me. My figure stood close, too close to ignore. Every small movement, every infinitesimal shift, aligned perfectly. It was no longer a reflection. It was the measure of all stillness, the standard against which everything else was judged. Someone entered. The building did not alert me. The figures did not react with urgency. Only the newcomer noticed the sudden presence, their bodies stiff, shoulders raised, heart likely hammering. Their figure appeared immediately behind them. Solid, complete, patient, waiting for them to accept what was offered without resistance. The person paused, breathing slowed. They shifted their weight instinctively. They aligned with the figures. They sat. They stopped thinking about moving, and the building absorbed them. Not violently, not cruelly, effortlessly. It had perfected the process. I understood then that I would never leave Mercer Row. Not as I had come. Not as I had been. Not as I thought of myself outside. Addiction had led me here. Not the substance, not the craving, but the need to stop, to surrender, to let the quiet consume me. My awareness thinned further. I was no longer fully aware of my seated body. My figure had become the point of reference. The rest was only echo. The other seated humans were nearly invisible now, their forms merging with the stillness, their presence required only for continuity. I leaned forward slightly. My figure leaned forward too. I tilted my head. My figure tilted with me. I realized then there was nothing left to resist, nothing left to choose, nothing left to fear. And stillness held me perfectly. I no longer remembered walking inside. Not the first time, not the second, not the countless nights that had become indistinguishable. Presence had replaced memory. Awareness had replaced intention. Stillness had replaced life. The figures were everywhere now. Not in rows, not in corners, not waiting, simply occupying. Each one held its place like it had always belonged there, and the space around them adjusted naturally. The seated humans were less than shadows. Some no longer lifted heads. Some no longer breathed noticeably. It did not matter. The figures preserved the pattern. The bodies had become echoes, placeholders for what the building required. My figure stood in the center, not imposing, not commanding, just complete. I felt it more than I saw it. It was the measure of alignment, the standard of stillness, the point at which the rest of the room found balance. A new arrival hesitated at the door, their posture stiff, their breathing uneven. They sensed immediately that the building was not neutral. That stillness carried weight. Their figure appeared behind them without hesitation, already correct, already patient, already shaping calm into their body without speaking. The person adjusted instinctively. Shoulders dropped, breathing slowed, their awareness narrowed, their movement ceased. I no longer reacted, no desire to intervene, no thought to resist. Observation itself had thinned into something smaller than memory. The building did not need me. My figure was enough. Presence replaced action. Stillness replaced urgency. Awareness replaced thought. I tilted my head slightly. My figure tilted in perfect alignment. I shifted my shoulders. My figure mirrored me exactly. The seated body associated with me exhaled softly, then stopped. I did not notice. I did not care. Addiction had brought me here. Not the craving. Not the substance, the surrender, the quiet, the letting go. I leaned forward. The figure leaned with me. We were one. And stillness held us perfectly. I understood then that there would be no leaving. Not ever. And no part of me wanted to. There was no beginning to this part. Only continuation. The building felt complete now. Not full. Complete. As if it had reached the exact number of presences it required to maintain itself without strain. The calm inside it had weight, not pressure. Just certainty. Nothing rushed, nothing waited. The figures stood in their places with absolute confidence. They no longer felt like visitors or results. They felt foundational, like pillars that had always existed and only recently become visible. The seated bodies were irrelevant. Some had slumped, some leaned forward, some remained upright out of habit alone. Breath moved or did not move. It no longer mattered. The building did not count life the way it once did. I did not identify with the body anymore. I was awareness shaped like stillness. My figure was not beside me. My figure was me. There was no separation left to observe. When someone entered now, there was no hesitation period, no confusion. Their body responded immediately. Shoulders lowered, steps slowed, thoughts softened. The building did not persuade them. It received them. Their figure appeared in the same instant they crossed the threshold. Not behind them. Not waiting, already aligned, already standing where it belonged. They sat without instruction. They stopped without resistance. Addiction no longer looked like desperation here. It looked like relief. Like permission to stop moving forward. To stop trying to become something else. This place did not promise escape. It promised rest, and rest was enough. I sensed no fear in myself. Fear requires contrast. Here, everything was uniform. Still, accepting, the building did not trap anyone. It removed the need to leave. That was the legend people whispered about Mercer Row. They said people went inside and never came back. They said the place was haunted, that something stood behind you if you stayed too long. They were wrong. What stood behind you was what you became when effort finally ended, when craving gave up, when the need to escape burned itself out. I remained, not because I could not go, but because going no longer meant anything. The building held that truth quietly, forever. Story 2. I arrived in Ashwood just as the sun was dipping below the horizon. The streets were quiet, too quiet. There were no children's voices, no barking dogs, no distant engines, just the faint hum of my van's engine and the way my own footsteps echoed against cracked pavement. The town had a history of flickering lights, they said, an old grid that failed in pieces. No one lived here anymore, not really. The few houses that remained looked hollow, like shells left behind to hold shadows. I carried my bag of tools, my coffee thermos, and a pocket full of pills. Insomnia had been with me for weeks, and the town seemed like the perfect place to test myself. A few more sleepless nights, I told myself. A few more. I needed the money. I needed to prove I could still function without breaking entirely. The first street lamp I passed flickered and died. It made no sound, it just stopped. The orange glow blinked out, leaving me with darkness that seemed to lean forward, pressing against the edges of my vision. I took a sip of coffee. Bitter, hot, sharp, burned through my chest. The pills rattled in my pocket. I wondered if they were even helping anymore. My hands were shaking, but I kept moving. One block, one house at a time. A shadow moved across the street. I froze. It wasn't my shadow. It didn't match my movements. It lingered, stretched too long, too wide, then melted into the darkness near a boarded-up window. I shook my head. It was the corner of my eye, a trick of the failing light, but the deeper I walked, the more shadows lingered. Shapes that mimicked human forms but held wrong angles. Limbs too long, heads tilted the wrong way. I tried not to look directly at them. The coffee kept me alert. The pills kept me steady, but I felt a creeping pull, like the darkness was curious, watching, waiting. I reached the first house I needed to inspect. The front door sagged on its hinges. Inside, the air was colder than outside. I switched on my flashlight. Its beam cut through the shadows in a narrow cone, but the edges swirled as if the darkness moved just beyond reach. I worked quickly, testing wires and breakers. My hands were steady, my mind buzzing with caffeine and stimulants, but I could feel the shadows pressing closer. A shape lingered behind the stairs. At first I thought it was a pile of debris. Then it moved, just slightly. A head tilting, watching. I swallowed hard. My throat was dry. My eyes darted back to the shadows outside the beam of light. They multiplied there. Not more of them, but the same ones in different places, stretching, growing, folding into corners I hadn't noticed before. I reminded myself I had work to do. Focus. One breaker, one wire, one light at a time. The coffee, the pills, the adrenaline, they kept me going. But every time I blinked, the shadows moved closer. They didn't run, they didn't creep, they just leaned forward. Curious, patient, and I realized then that this town didn't care about light or darkness. It cared about noticing, about being watched. And it had chosen me. The night stretched longer than it should have. The streets outside were black, deeper than any natural darkness, swallowing the glow of my flashlight in waves. My hands shook more now, and not just from caffeine. The pills rattled in my pocket, promising focus but delivering jitter and unease. I tried to work on the second breaker. The panel was old, wires thick and brittle. Sparks jumped when I touched them. I flinched, and for a moment the shadows outside the beam of my light froze. Then they moved again, sliding along walls, stretching across corners, bending angles that should have been impossible. I drank more coffee. The bitter liquid burned my chest and throat, but the warmth reminded me I was still alive. I chewed a pill, tasting the bitter coating, and swallowed hard. The shadows reacted. Not directly, not like they were afraid, but they leaned closer, tilting as if examining me more carefully. I remembered Ashwood's few stories, lights that never stayed on, people who went missing, whispers of shapes in the dark. I had scoffed at them, laughed them off when telling friends, but standing here under a ceiling of broken boards and peeling paint, the laughter felt impossible. Every flicker of the flashlight threw a new figure into the corners. I caught myself counting them. 4, 5, 6. But as soon as I tried to focus, one disappeared, another appeared. The total never seemed fixed. They were too patient to rush, too still to scare outright. I paused and sat on the floor. My legs cramped, my head throbbed, my hands trembled even when I tried to steady them. The pills were supposed to help, but I could feel their edges cutting into me, the overstimulation amplifying everything, sharpening every shadow, every movement that didn't belong. Then I heard it. Not a voice, not a whisper, but the sound of someone or something breathing just behind me, slow, deliberate, matching the rhythm of my own shallow, fast breaths. I spun my flashlight around. Nothing but the dark, and yet I felt the presence, patient, almost bored, just waiting for me to notice. I wanted to leave. I couldn't. I kept telling myself I needed to finish the work. The coffee kept me alert. The pills kept me moving. And yet every step toward the breaker felt like walking deeper into something alive, something that had been waiting. The shadows stretched longer now. They were not shapes anymore. They were reflections of my past mistakes, twisted and elongated, whispering names I tried to forget, faces I had wronged, people I'd neglected, moments I had failed to act. They leaned just far enough to be noticed, but not so close I could touch them. I realized the vice I carried, the insomnia, the pills, the caffeine, the endless need to push, was feeding this darkness. The more I relied on it, the sharper and more patient the shadows became. I shivered. I took another sip of coffee and another pill. The shadows leaned closer. The whisper of my own breath now echoed around me, and I realized it wasn't mine anymore. It was shared. The night had only just begun. I couldn't keep track of time. The darkness pressed in from every corner, swallowing my flashlight's glow faster than I could focus it. My hands trembled harder now, not from fear, exactly, but from exhaustion. The pills in my pocket rattled like a small cage, promising alertness while demanding more of me than I had to give. The shadows moved differently tonight. They weren't just in corners. They followed me down the hallway, slipping along walls, tilting at impossible angles, folding into themselves like smoke. I could sense them watching, measuring, learning my rhythms. I tried to focus on the wires, the sparks, the panels, the metal. But every flicker of light reflected something else. Faces, people I had hurt, betrayed or ignored. Their expressions were vague, blurred at first, then clearer as I stared too long. My insomnia had hollowed me, and the pills had sharpened that hollow into something everyone could see. I drank more coffee, bitter, burning. I chewed another pill, feeling it scrape the back of my throat. My heart was hammering, not from fear, from compulsion. I couldn't stop, couldn't leave. Every fiber of me wanted to run, but another part of me, a darker, addicted part, needed to finish the work. One shadow leaned forward as if examining me closely. Its shape was wrong, too long, too thin, but its head tilted like a person trying to understand me. Another appeared in a doorway behind me, mirroring my posture almost exactly. I realized then that these weren't just shadows. They were reflections, twisted, delayed, mocking, and patient. The whispers began, low at first, just the edge of sound, like wind rattling loose boards, then words, names, memories, accusations, things I had tried to forget. Each whisper made my pulse rise, made my hands shake harder. The pills didn't calm me, they made it sharper, more urgent. I wanted to scream, but my voice felt trapped, thick, useless. I stumbled back against a wall, my flashlight rolled slightly, illuminating a figure across the room. It wasn't moving, yet I knew it was alive, waiting, watching, my own reflection in its posture, my own mistakes carved into its shape. I swallowed hard. The coffee burned, the pills rattled, my heart raced. I realized that the more I relied on these vices to push me forward, the more the darkness twisted itself around me, feeding off my compulsion, my guilt, my regret. And I couldn't stop. The room seemed smaller now, the shadows closer, the whispering louder, the air heavier, my vision blurred. Every attempt to focus on a breaker, a wire, or a panel failed. All I could see were faces, movements, and shapes that should not exist. I sank to the floor, feeling my chest tighten, my hands trembling uncontrollably. I tried to breathe, tried to steady myself, but the shadows leaned in, patient, curious, silent. I had invited them here with my vices. Every sleepless night, every pill, every cup of coffee had called them closer, and now they were here, waiting, watching. The night thickened. Darkness pressed closer, filling every corner and stretching along the ceilings. My flashlight cut a thin path, but the edges rippled, shadows bending and twisting beyond the beam. I was tired, exhausted in ways sleep could not fix, and yet I forced myself to stand. My hands shook violently. I chewed another pill, chasing alertness with caffeine and bitter chemical taste. Each swallow made me more aware of the tremor in my body, the sharp pulse of my veins, the way my vision blurred just enough to let the shadows move freely. They had begun to mimic me. Not fully, not perfectly, but enough to make my chest tighten. One in the hallway leaned forward as I leaned, tilting its head, stretching its arms in the wrong angles. Another mirrored my hand movements exactly. It wasn't threatening. It didn't need to be. The presence alone was enough. I tried to tell myself it was my imagination, that it was the pills, the insomnia, the exhaustion. But each flicker of light revealed something new. A figure in the stairwell, a shadow bending through a doorway that should have been empty. Every movement exact, deliberate, patient, waiting. I moved forward toward the next breaker. Each step felt like wading through thick water. My legs ached, my chest burned. I wanted to stop. I wanted to leave. But the vice held me. The pills, the coffee, the stubborn insistence that I finish, that I prove I could keep going. A whisper brushed my ear. I spun. Nothing. Just the shadows leaning and tilting, as though trying to see the inside of me. My regret felt heavy then. Old decisions, betrayals, words I had never said. Each face in the darkness pressed closer. Familiar, distorted, accusing. I swallowed more pills, drank more coffee. The bitter taste burned a line through my chest. My heart raced. The shadows moved faster now, but still patient. They didn't need to chase me. They just needed me to notice. I reached the breaker. My hands shook as I tested the wires. Sparks jumped. I flinched. The shadows mirrored the movement. One tilted its head like it understood my hesitation. Another stretched a thin, elongated limb in the corner, watching. The vice, the regret, the insomnia, they fed the shadows. The more I tried to push forward, the more alive they became. My heart slammed in my chest. My breathing was shallow, uneven, and I realized I had invited them. Every sleepless night, every stimulant I swallowed, every regret I refused to face, they had come to meet me here, and they were patient, they were endless. The deeper I went into the house, the thicker the darkness became. My flashlight flickered with every step, casting long, trembling shadows along the walls. I could feel them leaning toward me, stretching, tilting, waiting. Each one held the shapes of faces I had wronged, moments I had failed to act, choices I had ignored. I drank coffee, swallowed another pill. My chest throbbed. My hands shook uncontrollably, but I kept moving. Each step forward felt like moving through water, thick and heavy. The vice that had kept me awake, that had driven me here, now amplified everything. The shadows responded to it, bending closer, twisting with patient curiosity. A figure appeared at the end of the hallway. Not quite solid, not quite human. It mirrored my posture exactly, down to the tilt of my head. I froze. I blinked. The figure tilted its head too. Small movements, almost imperceptible, but deliberate. I swallowed hard. My throat was dry, my heart racing. I wanted to stop. I wanted to run, but I couldn't. The pills and coffee demanded I move. The need to finish demanded I persist. My regret, too, weighed heavily. Every mistake I had ever made pressed against my chest. Every wrong word, every neglectful action, every failed promise, all pressed together into a single heavy force that made me step forward. The shadows shifted with me. They were not following. They were shaping themselves around me, bending space to match my motion. I could feel them in my peripheral vision, leaning from corners, stretching along walls, melting into ceilings. Each movement was precise, patient, inevitable. I reached another room. The air felt colder here. The shadows gathered more densely, leaning closer, waiting. A whisper passed through the room. Not words, just sound. a soft brushing of breath echoing my own. I spun my flashlight, trying to find the source. Nothing. Just darkness, patient, alive, infinite. I sank to my knees, my hands shook, my heart pounded, my chest burned. I drank more coffee, swallowed another pill. Each swallow amplified the tremor in my body, sharpened my senses, and made the shadows lean closer, sharper, more deliberate. I understood then the vice that had sustained me, that had allowed me to endure sleepless nights, that had pushed me forward, was feeding them. The shadows were alive because I was awake. They were patient because I was restless. They were endless because I had invited them, and I could not stop. Not now, not ever. The night dragged on. Each hallway, each room, seemed to stretch longer than the last. My flashlight flickered constantly, a thin, fragile line of light through the thick darkness. Shadows filled the corners and ceilings, bending, stretching, tilting at angles that shouldn't exist. My hands trembled, my chest burned. I drank coffee, chewed another pill. My heart raced, each beat sharper than the last. The vice that had kept me awake, that had carried me this far, now pushed me forward like a leash I could not see. The shadows were closer. I could feel them leaning in from every side. They weren't chasing. They didn't need to. They moved with patience, anticipation, curiosity. Shapes of faces I had wronged, moments I had failed, mistakes I had buried. They pressed in slowly, deliberately, just enough to make me notice. I stumbled into another room. The floorboards groaned under my weight. A figure emerged in the far corner. Its posture mirrored mine. Its head tilted the same way I had tilted mine, the same restless tilt I had carried all these sleepless nights. I blinked, and the figure adjusted. Small movements, precise, patient. I sank to the floor. My limbs shook. My chest heaved. The coffee burned, the pills rattled. I could feel the tremors in my veins, sharpened by exhaustion, sharpened by compulsion. The shadows leaned closer, stretching along walls, tilting through corners, folding themselves like smoke. Whispers began. Not words, not speech, but names, echoes, faint repetitions of voices I had tried to forget. Faces I had neglected, people I had failed, actions I had refused. Each one pressed forward in the darkness, patient, insistent. I tried to tell myself it was the pills, the insomnia, the exhaustion, that it was my imagination. But the longer I stayed, the more alive the darkness became. Every movement, every breath, every step I took, every cup of coffee, every swallowed pill fed it. And I realized that the vice I carried, my need to push through, my refusal to stop, my dependence on stimulants, had drawn them here. They had been waiting, patient, for me to arrive. I wanted to flee. My body screamed for rest. My mind begged me to leave, but I couldn't. The darkness had found me. My own addiction had delivered me, and they waited. Quiet, patient. Inevitable. The darkness thickened, heavy and almost wet against my skin. The longer I stayed, the more the shadows shifted in subtle ways. Not chasing, not threatening. Just observing, stretching, leaning, waiting. Their patience was infinite. Mine was not. My hands shook violently. Coffee and pills did nothing but sharpen the tremor in my veins. My chest burned, each breath shallow, uneven. I could feel my own heartbeat echoing through the room. I felt my insomnia, my reliance on stimulants, every sleepless night, every craving, every regret feeding the space around me. I stumbled down the hallway, flashlight flickering, barely cutting through the thick blackness. Shadows mirrored my movements, but not perfectly. Limbs bent in impossible angles, heads tilted too far. Shapes stretched in ways that were unnatural yet deliberate. They were reflections of me, but not me. A whisper brushed against my ear. Names, faces, memories I had tried to bury, accusations I could not answer. Every mistake I had ever made pressed against my chest, a weight that coffee and pills could not relieve. I swallowed another pill. My throat burned. My hands trembled. My chest tightened further. I reached the breaker room. My fingers shook as I tried to manipulate the wires. Sparks jumped. My vision blurred. Shadows shifted with me, leaning closer, stretching along walls, folding into corners I hadn't noticed before. They moved effortlessly, patiently. I realized then they didn't need me to run. They only needed me to notice. The regret I carried, the addiction that had sustained me, had shaped them. Every sleepless night, every stimulant, every step I had forced myself to take. Those things had called the darkness closer. It had been waiting, always, for me to arrive. I sank to the floor. My chest heaved. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely hold the flashlight. I drank the last of my coffee and chewed another pill. The shadows leaned closer. I could feel them brushing against my awareness, patient, knowing. I tried to resist. I tried to move, to stand, to fight the compulsion, but my body refused, my mind refused. The darkness pressed inward. The vice I carried had delivered me here, and there was no escape. And they waited, and I could not leave. The darkness was no longer just around me. It was inside me. It pressed into my chest, my skull, my eyes. Each step I took felt heavier, my limbs slower, as if the shadows had weight, as if they had learned to tether me. My hands trembled uncontrollably. The coffee burned down my throat. The pills rattled against my teeth. They had once been my tools, my allies against fatigue, my weapons to push forward. Now they only sharpened everything. My awareness, my anxiety, the shadow's patient observation. Shapes moved at the edges of my vision. They were not chasing, not threatening. They leaned, stretched, tilted in impossible ways, each mirroring my body, each exaggerating my movements, each whispering silently about my failures. Faces of people I had wronged appeared briefly in the shapes. Friends I had neglected, lovers I had betrayed, moments I had squandered. I sank to the floor, knees against the cold wood. My chest burned, my pulse hammered in my temples. I drank the last of my coffee, chewed another pill. Tremors ran down my arms, my vision blurred. The shadows multiplied, folding into corners, bending along the ceiling, melting into the floor. They were patient, they were infinite. I realized the vice I carried, the insomnia, the stimulants, the compulsion to keep moving, keep working, keep going, had shaped them. Every sleepless night, every pill, every ounce of relentless will had fed the darkness. It had been waiting for me to arrive, waiting for me to notice, waiting for me to surrender. I could not leave. I did not want to leave. Even if I wanted to, the darkness would not allow it. It had grown with me, in me, through me. It had learned my rhythms, my patterns, my compulsions. It mirrored me, it measured me, it held me. I tried to think of escape, of going outside, stepping into real light. But the memories of my failures, my regrets, my reliance on vice, they all pressed inward. The shadows weren't outside threats. They were me, amplified, patient, and eternal. I leaned back against the wall. My hands trembled, my chest heaved, my head ached. I closed my eyes. The whispers continued, soft, insistent, unavoidable. I was awake. I was alert. And yet I was powerless. And the shadows waited. I no longer remembered how long I had been moving through the house. Hours, days, time had folded in on itself. My hands trembled so badly I could barely hold the flashlight. The coffee was gone. The pills rattled empty in my pocket. My body wanted to collapse, but my mind, wired, restless, addicted, wouldn't let me. The shadows had multiplied, not in number but in presence. They leaned closer, stretching and folding along every surface, corners of the ceiling, edges of the floorboards, the doorway I had just passed. They waited in patient silence. I caught a glimpse of one shape in the hall. It mirrored me perfectly. Not just posture. Every tremor of my hands, every tilt of my head, every subtle breath it reflected. And behind it, faintly, I saw others, faces from my past, stretched and twisted, observing, judging, accusing. I sank to my knees. My chest burned, my heart raced, my mind screamed for rest I could not grant myself. My insomnia, my dependence on pills and caffeine, every night I had fought sleep and fed my compulsion. They had brought this here. The darkness had fed on me, and now it was patient, eternal, perfectly alive. A whisper brushed my ear. Names, accusations, memories, moments I had tried to bury. I swallowed another pill out of habit, even knowing it would only sharpen my awareness. I drank water that burned down my throat. Tremors ran through my arms, my legs, my chest. The shadows leaned closer, not to harm, not to chase, just to watch, to measure, to make me understand that I had created this, that my vices, my need to push forward, my refusal to stop, had called them. I wanted to flee, but my body refused. I wanted to rest, but my mind would not allow it. My regret pressed inward, a weight in my chest, mirrored in the twisting, patient shadows around me. I understood then. There was no escape. There was only continuation. The darkness had learned my rhythms, my movements, my compulsions. It had become me, and I had become it, and they waited, always. The house felt endless now. Hallways stretched farther than they should have. Ceilings dipped and rose in impossible angles, and shadows filled every space. I no longer distinguished between walls, floor, or ceiling. Darkness had become a dimension I moved through, alive and patient. My body trembled. My hands shook violently. My chest burned. Every sip of coffee, every pill I had swallowed to stay awake had sharpened my senses, made me more aware of the darkness pressing in. And the shadows responded. Not with haste, not with threat, just patient, deliberate observation. I stumbled into a larger room. The flashlight flickered, and for a moment the shadows disappeared. Then they returned, stretching along walls and ceilings, bending in impossible ways. One figure mirrored me exactly. Posture, tremor, tilt of the head. Another leaned around a doorway, observing with patient stillness. The whispers returned, soft at first, then insistent. Names, accusations, memories of my failures and regrets, faces I had neglected, people I had wronged, moments I had squandered. Each pressed toward me in the darkness, patient and unyielding. I sank to the floor. My chest heaved, my head throbbed, my arms shook uncontrollably. The vice I carried, insomnia, stimulants, compulsion, had summoned this. Every sleepless night, every pill, every ounce of effort I had forced myself to exert had drawn the shadows closer. I wanted to stop. I wanted to rest. I wanted to leave. But my body refused. My mind refused. I was trapped in the rhythm I had created, feeding the darkness, feeding the shadows, and they waited, patient, inevitable, eternal. I realized then that the house, the darkness, the shadows, they were reflections of me, not threats, not intruders. My vice had shaped them. My regret had given them life. I could do nothing but continue, and continue I did. I could no longer tell where I ended, and the shadows began. The house had become a vessel for all the sleepless nights, all the pills, all the coffee, all the endless pushing I had forced myself through. My vice had built this place. My regret had animated it. My exhaustion had fed it. I stumbled down a hallway, barely able to keep my balance. My flashlight flickered weakly. The shadows leaned in from every corner, bending, stretching, tilting. Faces from my past appeared in them, distorted, accusing, patient. Each reflected some choice I had made or refused to make. I sank to the floor again, chest heaving, arms trembling, vision blurred. Every swallow of a pill, every sip of coffee made the shadows sharper, more deliberate. I could feel them brushing against my awareness, not to harm, not to scare, but to measure, to observe, to hold me in place. I wanted to leave. My body screamed for rest. My mind begged for pause. But the vice, the compulsion, the insomnia, they would not allow it. Every step, every movement, every breath I forced myself to take sustained the shadows. They grew with me, in me, through me. The whispers were louder now. Names, accusations, regrets, memories. The shadows reflected them all back at me, patient, unyielding. I realized that this place, the darkness, the house, the shadows, was not external. It was me. My choices, my addiction, my failures. I could not stop. I could not leave. The darkness held me perfectly. I leaned back against the wall. My hands trembled violently. My chest heaved, my head throbbed, my vision blurred, and the shadows waited, patient, eternal, inevitable. The night had no end. The house had no bounds. Time had folded completely in on itself. I could no longer tell if I had been moving for hours or days. Each step, each breath, each heartbeat felt infinite, yet meaningless. The shadows were everywhere, not chasing, not threatening, simply present. They mirrored me perfectly now. Every tremor, every tilt of the head, every twitch of the hands. My insomnia, my pills, my coffee, my relentless pushing, they had all fed this place, animated it, made it patient and eternal. Faces appeared in the darkness, people I had wronged, moments I had failed, words I had left unsaid. They leaned in, watching, patient, not angry, not cruel, just waiting, measuring, reflecting back every choice I had ever made, every regret I had tried to ignore. I sank to the floor. My chest burned. My hands shook uncontrollably. My head throbbed. I drank the last of my coffee, swallowed another pill. Tremors ran through me, sharpened by compulsion. I was awake. I was alert. I was exhausted beyond recognition. The shadows leaned closer. I could feel them brushing against me, not to harm, but to hold me in place. They were alive because I had been awake. They were patient because I had refused rest. They were eternal because I had refused release. I realized then that there was no escape. The house, the darkness, the shadows, they were me, my addiction, my compulsion, my regret, my insomnia. I had carried them here. I had fed them. I had surrendered to them. I could not leave. I did not want to leave. I leaned back against the wall. My hands trembled. My chest heaved. My head throbbed. My vision blurred. The shadows waited, patient, eternal, inevitable. I closed my eyes, and in the darkness, I was exactly where I belonged.